Hello historians and welcome back to another episode. Today we are continuing our deep dive into the life of King Henry VIII and his reign. This time focusing on the later half of 1540 all the way through to 1542. It's clear to say that at this point in his life, King Henry VIII is probably the happiest he has been since his son Edward's birth. He has just had the easiest divorce in his life from Anne of Cleves, who he gave the honorary title of the King's sister, and he was passionately in love with young Catherine Howard. Henry divorced Anne of Cleves on the 12th of July 1540, and he was married to Catherine Howard on the 28th of July. Honestly, that's not the quickest turnaround that Henry's done with his marriage. The couple were married at Oatlands Palace, and to celebrate the nuptials, Henry had his former right-hand man, Thomas Cromwell, executed on Tower Hill. Ever the romantic Henry. For 10 days the marriage was kept a secret, as Henry wished to spend alone time with his wife before court resumed and the two would lack privacy. Henry was overjoyed with his young bride and was determined to lose weight. He got up at 6 a.m, went to church, and then went hunting. Whether Catherine felt the same, we don't know. However, she appeared cheerful and loving towards her husband and was lavished with more jewels than she could ever imagine. So I'm sure she was fine. The marriage meant that the Howards were back in the king's inner circle and were once again a powerhouse at court, like they were during the reign of Anne Boleyn. However, Henry now would become ruthless in eradicating religious opposition and heresy, and the latter years of his reign would be a dangerous time for English Protestants. Despite the country supposedly being Protestant under the Church of England, but I think it's important to remember that Henry himself was never a Protestant. He remained a Catholic. At a push, he was like an Anglo-Catholic, like his daughter Elizabeth would be, but he always remained a Catholic. On the 6th of August 1540, Henry and Catherine left Oatlands Palace and moved to Hampton Court. From here, Henry rode alone with a few attendants to visit Anne of Cleves. French ambassador Marillac wrote that they were on the best possible terms. It was thought by some that the king might restore her to her place as queen, and there were some who supported this view, but much to their dismay, this would never be the case. The purpose of the visit was for Anne to sign deeds of separation. The marriage was finally made public on the 8th of August 1540 at Hampton Court Palace, when Catherine made her first appearance as queen. Catherine was kind and did her best to use her influence to help people, and she had a bright personality, a far cry from her arrogant cousin. She loved the importance that the role of queen gave her. Henry doted on Catherine, and as mentioned before, showered her in jewels, but also gowns. She had everything she could ever want, and unsurprisingly, it all went to her head. Although we don't know Catherine's exact year of birth, she was only a teenager when she was queen, so it's hardly unexpected. As a result, many of the older people at court disapproved of her and her greed. This included her eldest stepdaughter, the Lady Mary. Despite the two sharing the same faith, Mary did not show her new stepmother the same respect that she did for Jane Seymour and Anna Cleves. It could have been down to greed, or it could have been because she was potentially 9 years older than her stepmother. Again, this is difficult to pinpoint due to not knowing Catherine's exact age, but either way, Mary was older than her stepmother. But to what extent? And Mary was still unmarried at the age of 24. Pretty late for Tudor society, especially that of a princess. In the October, Henry passed the Queen Consort Act, which gave her power to act as a woman sole without the consent of the King's Highness. And, to top it all off, he then gave Catherine all the lands and manors that had once been in the possession of Queen Jane, all as a mark of love to his wife and queen. And I think the fact that Catherine is inheriting a lot of Jane Seymour's possessions really goes to show how much Henry was in love with Catherine Howard, as Jane was his favourite wife, so they would have been the most dear to him. When Jane died, even during his marriage to his sixth wife, Henry was painted with Jane in his family portraits, and he's eventually buried with Jane too. The queen that he saw as his one true wife and queen. I do wonder, had Henry and Catherine's marriage not gone the way that it did, would it be Catherine Howard in these paintings? Would he be buried with her instead? As he seems to genuinely be infatuated by her. Let me know what you think. Henry and Catherine spent Christmas and New Year's at Hampton Court Palace, and as you could probably guess, the celebrations were lavish. He gave her a ridiculous amount of jewels and furs. Unsurprisingly, Henry's spending on his wife had made the treasury broke. The gems that were in Catherine's presents were recycled gems that had belonged to his previous wives, and he could not afford a coronation for Catherine. But, like Jane, he may have delayed the coronation until Catherine had proved herself with an heir. For the first few months of their marriage, Henry had visited Catherine's bed almost every night, but she never did conceive. However, I believe this was more down to Henry's age and infirmity than Catherine. The ladies Mary and Anne joined the King and Queen on the 3rd of January 1541 at Hampton Court. Mary still didn't like her stepmother Catherine, but she enjoyed the company of her friend and former stepmother Anne of Cleves, and Anne got on with everyone, so she helped smooth everything out. That evening, the king went to bed early while the women stayed up, and Anne of Cleves danced with the new queen. Henry then gave Catherine yet more presents, this time 2 dogs and a ring. Now, I can't tell if this is a snub or a kind gesture, but Catherine gave these presents to Anne of Cleves. Anne had given the royal couple 2 horses with violet velvet trappings prior to arrival at Hampton Court. At the end of 1541, Marillac, the French ambassador, observed that the king was marvellously excessive in eating and drinking, and that people say he is often of a different opinion in the morning than after dinner. Henry was suffering from another bout of ill health. His leg was causing him extreme pain, and he had sunk into a deep depression. Catherine, as of yet, had not seen this side to her husband, and she could not arouse him from his depression. He refused to rise even for her. Catherine was alarmed by his behaviour, but by the 19th of March, he was fine again. Also, Henry was becoming paranoid in his old age. In the spring, there was an uprising in Yorkshire, headed by Sir John Neville, a Catholic, and the purpose was to restore the old forms of religion in England. When I say old forms, I mean like old forms of worship, stuff like that. Henry became paranoid and feared that this would lead to plots to put the Plantagenets back on the throne. His mother's family, the Yorks, which you can learn about in my video about King Henry VII. He had imprisoned 68-year-old Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury in the Tower of London, as far back as February, for this reason. Margaret was the daughter of George, Duke of Clarence, the uncle to Henry's mother Elizabeth of York, which meant that she had a claim to the throne and was a Plantagenet, a Tudor enemy. Margaret was harmless though, and she never sought Henry's throne. She had been loyal and devoted to the Tudor family. However, with a rebellion on his hands, Henry had decided that the Countess of Salisbury was a threat. It wasn't Margaret that Henry had an issue with. It was her estranged son, Cardinal Reginald Pole, as he had been outspoken about the king. But as Henry couldn't reach Reginald, who was out of the country and being protected by the Pope, he turned to his mother instead. Catherine pleaded with Henry to spare the pensioner's life, but he ordered that a death sentence be provided. An Act of Attainder was passed against Lady Salisbury. Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, was executed on Tower Green on the 28th of May 1541 at the age of 68. The executioner was young and inexperienced, and he panicked and struck out blindly, hacking at his victim's head, neck and shoulders. The cruel end of Lady Salisbury sickened even Henry's contemporaries, but he didn't care. The uprising in Yorkshire was speedily put down with the execution of its leaders. In response to the uprising on the 30th of July 1541, Catherine and Henry left London for their Northern Progress tour in hopes of inspiring loyalty to his northern subjects. And yet again, he gave Katherine more gifts. This time he gave her a golden brooch, an ideal gift, he said, for a perfect wife of virtue and good behaviour. However, Katherine's early life was about to come and bite her. It's too much to explain right now, and I may do a separate video on it, but the TLDR was Katherine was not a virgin when she married the king, like he thought she was. A Protestant called John Lascelles spoke to Archbishop Cranmer and told him that his sister Mary had been living with Katherine at the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk's house in Lambeth, and that she had information that would affect the king's marriage. When Cranmer asked him why it took so long to disclose, Lascelles said he'd been wrestling with his conscience. Cranmer had nothing against Katherine, but he wanted a Protestant queen to push Protestant reforms, and spoke to Lascelles' sister Mary to find out more on the queen's past. Mary Hall, Lascelles' sister, told Cranmer all about Katherine's activities with her music teacher, Henry Manox, and then Francis Derham, the latter of whom would creep often into Katherine's bed. In the August, Francis Derham was appointed as Katherine's private secretary. Francis had a fiery temper and was over-familiar with his royal mistress. Many felt that he was getting preferential treatment and they disliked him. Katherine had employed him because he held information that could endanger her position as queen. Katherine warned Derham to take heed with what words you speak. When Henry asked his wife why she had employed the unpopular Francis Derham, she told him that the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk had asked her to be good to him, and so I will. Henry's sister Margaret, former Queen of Scotland, died on the 8th of October 1541. Her death meant that, out of Henry's siblings, he was the last one left, as his younger sister Mary had died in 1533. Katherine and Henry returned to Hampton Court Palace on the 30th of October 1541, and a special service of Thanksgiving took place on the 1st of November. Now, for those of you in America, this is not a Thanksgiving service as you might think of it. After all, America and its forefathers weren't a thing yet. This service was to give thanks for the king's marriage to Katherine, and to bless his marriage to his wife. On that day, he publicly thanked God in the Chapel Royal for blessing him for so perfect a companion. I render thanks to thee, O Lord, that after so many strange accidents that have befallen my marriage, thou hast been pleased to give me a wife so entirely conformed to my inclinations as her I have now. Meanwhile, Cranmer had written the king a letter with all the information he had found out about the Queen's past, and left it on a chair for the king to find. Henry read the note that Cranmer had left him, and he did not believe the accusations. However, he did ask Cranmer to investigate the matter. You are not to desist until you have got to the bottom of the plot. He then ordered for the Queen and Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, to be confined to the Queen's apartments until their names were cleared. Henry stayed away and would never see his Queen again. I'm sorry that this video had to be in 2 parts, but even when writing this, I feel like I could have gone even deeper, especially with Katherine and her antics at the Dowager Duchess's household. Katherine Howard, like Anne Boleyn for me, is someone who I could talk about for ages. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, and maybe watch another one. But until the next one, have a wonderful day.